The year was 701 BCE, and the ancient world trembled under the might of the Assyrian Empire. Their armies were unmatched, their tactics brutal, and their reputation for destruction unparalleled. They had conquered nations, toppled kings, and left a trail of devastation in their wake. But outside the walls of Jerusalem, something extraordinary happened, a miracle that defied all human explanation. In a single night, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers lay dead. No battle was fought, no swords were drawn, and no disease was detected. It was an act of divine intervention that would echo through history. Jerusalem, the city of God, was in turmoil. Once a beacon of faith and worship, it had fallen into spiritual decay. King Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, had led the people astray, embracing the idols of neighboring nations. The streets were lined with altars to false gods, and the sweet smell of incense burned for Baal and Asherah filled the air. The Temple of Solomon, the holiest site in Judah, stood abandoned and desecrated. The people had forgotten their covenant with God, and their hearts had grown cold. Young Prince Hezekiah watched this decline with a heavy heart. From his palace window, he saw his people bowing to lifeless statues, their faces filled with empty devotion. He remembered the stories of his ancestors, of Abraham's faith, Moses' miracles, and David's victories. These were not just tales to Hezekiah, they were reminders of God's promises and power. While others turned away, Hezekiah clung to his faith, waiting for the day he could restore his people to their rightful place. When King Ahaz died, Hezekiah ascended to the throne at just 25 years old. He was young, but his vision was clear. His first act as king was to reopen the Temple of Solomon. The massive bronze gates, long sealed shut, creaked open for the first time in years. The people watched in awe as their new king took a stand for God. He called the priests and Levites to cleanse the temple, removing every trace of idolatry. The air was filled with the sound of hammers as false idols were smashed and altars torn down. Hezekiah didn't stop there. He reinstated the Passover, inviting not only Judah but also the remnants of the northern kingdom of Israel to join in the celebration. It was a bold move, one that signaled a return to unity and faith. The people began to remember who they were, a chosen nation set apart by God. The temple once again echoed with prayers and songs, and the streets of Jerusalem were filled with joy. But not everyone celebrated Hezekiah's reforms. Far to the north, in the mighty city of Nineveh, King Sennacherib of Assyria watched with growing irritation. He had already conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, scattering its people and leaving its cities in ruins. Now, this young king in Jerusalem dared to defy him. Sennacherib was a man of immense pride, boasting of his conquests on clay tablets and stone monuments. He called himself the great king, the king of the world, and he intended to prove it. The Assyrian army was a force unlike any the world had seen. They were masters of siege warfare, employing terrifying weapons and tactics. Their battering rams could reduce city walls to rubble, and their archers could rain down arrows so thick they blotted out the sun. They used psychological warfare, spreading fear and despair before they even attacked. Cities often surrendered at the mere sight of their approach. When Sennacherib's army marched toward Jerusalem, the ground shook beneath their feet. The people of Judah watched in horror as the horizon filled with the glint of spears and shields. The Assyrians surrounded the city, cutting off all supplies and communication. They built siege towers and camps, a clear message that they would not leave until Jerusalem fell. Inside the city, fear spread like wildfire. The people had heard stories of the Assyrians' cruelty, of cities burned to the ground, of kings impaled on stakes, of populations carried into exile. Now they faced the same fate, but Hezekiah refused to give in to despair. He strengthened the city's defenses, building higher walls and digging a secret tunnel to ensure a water supply. He stockpiled food and weapons, preparing for a long siege. Yet, Hezekiah knew that walls and weapons alone could not save them. He turned to God in prayer, tearing his robes and donning sackcloth as a sign of humility. He sent messengers to the prophet Isaiah, seeking God's guidance. Isaiah's response was clear: "Do not be afraid. The Assyrians have blasphemed the Lord, and he will defend this city." As the sun set, the Assyrian camp was alive with activity. Soldiers sharpened their weapons, lit campfires, and boasted of the riches they would plunder from Jerusalem. But as night fell, an eerie silence descended. Inside the city, the people waited, their hearts pounding with fear and hope. When dawn broke, the people of Jerusalem peered over the walls and saw a sight they would never forget. The Assyrian camp was littered with bodies, 185,000 soldiers lay dead. There were no signs of battle, no wounds, no explanation. It was as if an invisible hand had swept through the camp, striking down the mighty army in an instant. The few survivors fled in terror, carrying the news back to Nineveh. King Sennacherib, who had boasted of his invincibility, returned home in disgrace. Years later, while praying to his false god, he was assassinated by his own sons, a fitting end for a man who had defied the true God. Jerusalem was saved, not by human strength, but by divine intervention. The people rejoiced, singing praises to God and celebrating their deliverance. Hezekiah's faith had been rewarded, and the story of the angel who struck down the Assyrian army became a testament to God's power. This miracle was a turning point in history. It showed that no army, no matter how powerful, could stand against the will of God. It reminded the people of Judah that their strength lay not in their weapons or walls, but in their faith. Hezekiah's reign marked a spiritual revival in Judah. The people returned to God, and the temple became the center of worship once more. The story of the Assyrian defeat was passed down through generations, a reminder of God's faithfulness to those who trust in Him. The story of the angel who struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night is a powerful reminder of God's sovereignty and the unseen forces at work in our world. It shows us that no matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, faith in God can lead to miraculous deliverance. Hezekiah's trust in the face of overwhelming danger and the divine intervention that followed stand as timeless examples of what happens when human courage meets divine power. This incredible event not only saved Jerusalem, but also left a lasting legacy of hope, a testament to the fact that even in our darkest hours, God is always in control. Let this story inspire you to trust in the unseen, to stand firm in faith, and to remember that with God, nothing is impossible.